now the overall scenario between the Western world, that is more developed economies vis-a-vis developing, obviously developed are far ahead in terms of, one, the awareness, but obviously now they are not always there, because otherwise we won't have such amount of huge fines and penalties coming up. But if you look at it, the awareness is much higher. They are moving towards the evolved stage where they're looking at analytics, predictive analytics, all building in, which is where the investment is coming from. From an Indian context, I think we have seen so much of growth. The compliance topic is somewhere left behind, where we are looking at the modernization stage from the basic compliance, rather than getting into the evolving stage.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
You spoke about predictive analytics in India particularly. You spoke about predictive analytics, and in India particularly, with so many regulations, you yourself said, when every industry keeps having to juggle with whether we are compliant. I mean, as an example or a few examples, how does the analytics, or how do we structure our analytics so that we get kind of a predictive model that these are the places that we are probably going wrong. For example, every other month the minimum wages is revised one state or the other. I mean, even before a software can update itself. I mean, how do you even know that these are the places that you can go wrong? I mean, some examples around that, the analytics here.
Okay, let me just give you a very small example which I have seen. Again, it also depends on which are your risk indicators which you want to track. There are some challenges if you're going to say the minimum wage is going to be revised throughout. Obviously, you need to have a mechanism to capture the data, otherwise there's no analysis which can work. But if you look at it, let me give you a small MFI example, which is a microfinance institution which we started, which is again diversed in a rural base. If you look at the entire risk and compliance function over there, when it started, again it was to be every auditor going to every nook and corner, testing, doing every 100% transaction. Over a period they moved down, can we pull out all the data? Because they also went to data point of it. They had clearly laid down their key risk indicators. What are my indicators which I want to track, which can show from a market perspective that we are going wrong, right? They started taking that, doing the analysis. Now obviously they have moved to a dashboarding kind of a thing, where on a day end, entire systems data synchronized, and on a dashboard you can actually look at it where you are going wrong. And comparing with the market trends, because your competitors are also working in the same rural market, and all this data is available from an industry point of view. And that's where the comparison, when you look at these key indicators, that will show you where the things are going wrong. So probably those are the elements which needs to be looked at in a specific, basically first is the awareness, and that's where you have to start working with your operational team to see what can actually go wrong from that perspective.
Does that help? I think there's another question.
Governance at the US level, do you see that more and more regulations are going to come in for the software industry in particular? And how is the industry trying to tackle to the new regulation that might come in?
Okay, so right now if you look at it, there are regulations are there to come in. So in fact, many of the industry leaders do believe that at least there is going to be substantial change which is going to come in with the regulations which are there. Industry, if you're looking at from a gearing up perspective, yes, there are people who have, if they're, let me take the basic on your entire visa requirement and this thing, which is a regulation which is going to change. There are many organizations which are geared up as to how much I can do at back end and how much I can bring the work over here and look at it from that perspective. But still there are organizations, if you look at it without naming some of the ITS companies, because their model is on onshoring work, they are going to struggle. So the awareness is there in pockets. There are people who are going to face it, right? And it's better that once you start to do a preemptive analysis to come back, and there are few cases there will be challenges from that perspective. But it depends on how mature your organization and their risk and compliance function.
Any other? I think there's a question out there.
Hi, good afternoon, good evening. Maybe when you're talking about the risk, you said the prerequisite for risk is the data. So how do you think that current scenario, like startups, where the data is not available? So how one has to come up with a risk analysis for a startup, so that maybe we have seen some successful companies like Flipkart which actually went wrong in the due course of time. So what do you suggest, and how we have to make sure that the risks are addressed for a startup?
So let me just take this question back in terms of what I understand from your point is that in a startup scenario, you're saying that you don't have data. Is my understanding right of your question? Right? Okay. Now the question is, that's where we go wrong, right? In terms of when you start a new venture, when you start a business in a startup, right? As an operational person, obviously when you have not reached a scale, means look at Flipkart as an example itself. Now, you reached a particular stage where you had actually the number of transactions doubled every month, and you knew your business plan is going to look like that. That's where you actually synchronize as a promoter or as a business leader to come back and say, what are the things which are going to go wrong when I go up this thing? And that's where you create your data points. Right? That's the first preemptive start. It's not about growing. It's growing with a particular check, and that's the mindset change as a business leader you need to make.
Any other questions from the group?
Good evening, sir. My question is like some organizations go through a very hyper phase of growth in which it is generally seen that compliance or control takes a backseat. So being a risk leader, or as from a legal perspective, what are the key points that you would like to highlight which need attention in such companies so that we remain compliant, and in terms of legal as well as financial, there are also controls in place?
Okay, that's kind of a, let me put it, a little difficult question, because again, it all depends on the mindset of the promoter, right? At the end of the day, or a business leader as we call it. If the person is not going to be sensitized of the fact that if these things go wrong, the entire business model he's building today could be in jeopardy tomorrow, right? If that sensitization doesn't happen, the entire culture will not change, right? And that's something which, if I can say from an Indian context, needs to change, and which is changing. If you look at it, even the large promoter houses today, which are growing business, are sensitized about the risk factors, but it has to grow more and more to be, in the DNA of the organization.
Any other questions from the group? Okay, Purnima, hi.
I think from the regulator perspective, right now they're looking at the conduct risk, and one of the important element is developing the metrics around the conduct risk. So one, we spoke about the KRIs, and then we spoke about the predictive analytics. But what would be your thought on correlation of those metrics with the developing metrics for the conduct risk for the organization? Because it's more of a behavioral that you would have to.
Okay, so again, behavioral risk, if you look at it, again, from a predictive perspective, can be looked into. So if you look at it, let me take again a small example. If you go down to the grassroots level, if there are, I'm sorry, financial institutions is this thing. If you look at it from a rural perspective, right, there is a certain set of collections which happen, right? If my understanding of the question is what kind of analysis can be built around these things, right? One of the biggest loss making when it comes to rural sector, or when you're dealing with it, it was handling of cash, right? This collection used to be maximum happen through cash. And that's where the entire thing started saying that, are we going to have a fraud risk over here where people just take the cash, go away, you don't even know. But today, if you look at the system, right, overall there are risk indicators which are clearly say that what is the collection percentage which happens and the region, and you benchmark against what your competitors are doing it. Now, if you look at certain of the matured MFIs are looking at from a risk and compliance, are we in the collection DJ, and there can you identify, are there pointers which you can look at it. From again, you have to go back to the entire thing from a conduct perspective, which is the cycle you're looking at, and where there could be a conduct issues, and then build your KRIs around it.
Great. I think, yes, Vic, please go ahead. Sure.
I think I wanted to compliment your answer. There is a huge amount of focus on conduct, especially the CEOs and CEOs of an organization. I guess that's where we are headed. In a number of markets, being engaged in, or your organization being engaged in any money laundering activities or support, you are criminally liable. So you could go to jail. Yeah. Similarly, there is a regulatory focus in terms of performances and the bonuses attached to the senior execs, those being clawed back in terms of if the conduct is not up to the mark. So there is a huge amount of focus on improving conduct risk. But again, it kind of starts from, especially going back to the startup question, are you trying to build a sustainable business, or are you a fly-by-night operators? They used to exist, they will continue to exist, but the point is, are you doing a sustainable business? If yes, then please hire that chief risk officer, not at the end, but beginning of your startup, not when you're in trouble. But yeah, that's what.
Thank you.
Great. And Purnima, I think to answer your question, every industry has its own nuance, right? So it's also at what's at risk apart from culture. So because risk management will come at a cost. It won't cost. It would just happen because you want it or you don't want it. Great. So Mahesh, thank you once again, and thanks for taking the time out to join us in this session. Appreciate. So we had a business leader come and give us his perspective to kick off the day, and then we had someone from the consulting headset paint a so-called industry agnostic, geography agnostic view of risk. We now move to our first panel discussion for the day. And the way we've structured it is that the first panel discussion is purely on leaders who are doing this as their day job, who are leading risk and compliance as their day job in the Indian geography. So we've got some very accomplished people with us today. I will have Rajesh from KPMG, who is putting together, moderating this session, come and join me on the stage. Rajesh, if I can please have you. Thank you. Rajesh is a partner with KPMG and works with numerous multinational companies to assist them in the areas of governance, risk and compliance. After spending nearly 3 decades working with CEOs, CFOs, audit committees and boards of directors, Rajesh possesses in-depth understanding of evolving landscape and transformation of risk and compliance in the context of today's organization. Rajesh is a fellow chartered accountant from the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India and a graduate from the University of Mumbai. Joining him for this panel discussion, we have Avik Sinha, who is the CFO of JLL. Avik, please. We also have Ashish Lakratia, who is the company secretary and head of legal for Reliance Nippon Life Insurance. And we have Sunil Verma, director from LexCare. I will allow Rajesh to take this forward from here.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Okay, so our earlier speakers talked about various facets of risk and compliance, and one element which I think a common thread was on culture. And that just reminded me of a conversation I had about 6 months back. So I have a client which is basically a Norwegian company operating in India, and who's board director is in Australia. And so he was telling me that he's still not figured out, how Indians really think, because his point of view was that when you have a red light, the traffic signal, unless you have a policeman waiting there, nobody stops. So I think this is the culture of the culture, and I think this is what I think our speakers spoke about. I think Mukherjee. We need to inculcate a risk culture, compliance culture,